Hi, my name is Marissa Newsom, and I'm really excited that you're joining me today for this webinar about gifted students. Gifted students are um, abundant in every school and honestly sometimes mistaken, and we'll get into that a little more. I'm currently at the University of Tampa, and I'm going to pursue my master's degree in special ed so that I can work on doing assessment myself with gifted students. But for now, this webinar is just giving you the foundation of what is giftedness, what makes up gifted students, and also some misconceptions that they might have. So, like I've already said, we'll be discussing what is giftedness and then misconceptions that come along with gifted students, how we assess them, and what those assessments look like, because that is a multi-step process. And then finally, the classroom implications that happen. So, what do we do for our students, or what should we do for our students who are gifted? So first, to start, what is giftedness? Giftedness is a broad term. There are a lot of students who are gifted, but not in the same way. Giftedness pretty much states that a student has an excelling ability, and it can be in a variety of categories, but they're not the typical mainstream student. It's an excelling ability. Typically, they can do things faster or better, or maybe they have like social skills that are just not normal for their age. A lot of gifted students are referred to as like old souls. They're just being ahead of their time at a young age. So there's this chart that you'll see, and this chart shows the multiple intelligences, and specifically these these target many gifted students. So for instance, body smarts. Some gifted students are very kinesthetic learners. There's people smarts. They're really social. They're maybe like theatrical. Word smart. These are our linguistic students. Logic smart is often mathematics. Nature smart, like environmentalist, which is always very funny to see, especially in the elementary school. Normally that comes out later on as they get older. Self smart, are they very reflected? Are they capable of their emotions and understanding their emotions? There's also visual spatial. This is artistic students. Typically, they're excelling at art and colors and patterns. And then finally, there's musical. These students are like have an ear for tunes and rhythms, and typically can pick up music very quickly. But our main categories are intellectual, academic, creative and artistic, and then leadership. So, what makes a gifted student? How do we pick out the select few who are gifted when it encompasses so many different types of students? Well, a gifted child typically has an IQ that is above 115. And for reference, the majority of the population only has an IQ that falls between 85 and then 115. So for gifted students, in order to qualify, they have to be above the 115 IQ score. So for our mildly gifted students, that's about 115 to 130. Majority of our students will fall between mildly gifted and then the next one moderately gifted, which is 130 to 145. It is pretty rare and uncommon to see highly gifted students that fall between 145 to 160, but even more rare to have 160 or higher as a gifted student's IQ. An IQ of 160, especially when You're very young, testing at 6, 7, 8 years old. And while IQ doesn't necessarily change too much when you're getting older, if you're testing at 160, that's very impressive, and we don't see that too often. So for the majority of our students, when we're referring to them, we're focusing on our mildly gifted and moderately gifted students. So an IQ score of 115 to 145. And while it might seem that these students are just, very intelligent, and are capable of so much, because of that, message that we're receiving, because they have higher IQ scores, there are a lot of misconceptions that can come along with being gifted. So we'll talk about misconceptions within giftedness. I have to preface that these are misconceptions and they do not apply to every type of student. They will fall for some students and apply to some students and some not others. But there are additional misconceptions, and this list does not limit them, but these are the biggest misconceptions. So first, IQ does not equal intelligence. There is a small factor of how intelligent someone is with their IQ score. Typically, somebody who has a higher IQ score is intelligent, but that's not saying that somebody who doesn't have a high IQ score doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. They do go hand in hand, but that's not the only factor when determining someone's intelligence level. So with that being said, while these students who have high IQ levels would seemingly be intelligent, this is not always the case. They are intelligent. I mean, everybody's intelligent in their own way, but they are not always like the smartest, or they're held to this higher expectation because they're known to be the smartest, but this isn't always the case. Additionally, when you're gifted, this seems like this great label to have. And sometimes people forget that they're still students and they have specific needs. And when their brain works at this higher level, we tend to forget that every student has their own individual needs. And having giftedness or being gifted does also fall within some other factors. So, for instance, there are all different type of gifted students within racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, cultural populations, and from a very diverse economic status. So this is not like a one size fits all. Not all gifted students are going to be the same, so they're going to have different needs. Additionally, they can have learning disorders. So even though they might seem to have this really high IQ score, many gifted students are also dyslexic or might have a processing disorder where they need additional time. They also sometimes tend to lack socially and emotionally, even though that is one of our like on that wheel, that was one of our multiple intelligences, but they don't all fall within the same category. Therefore, some people might need the extra support within their, they might need extra support within a certain category, and even within their own talent. Sometimes students who are musically inclined just can't pick this one up, and we can't let the idea that they're gifted not give them the support they need. So I found this quote, and it says 14% of children who are identified as being intellectually gifted may also have a learning disability. This is so common that we assess that they're gifted and then no more assessments. And then they start to fall behind, and it's like, what's happening? What's going on? What's the reason why we are now all of a sudden having declining grades? Then they have this gifted title, and We just think it's the teacher, maybe they're giving up, and we forget to assess for additional learning abilities. 14% of all gifted students, that's a big number. We're talking percentages of all of our gifted students. So it's really important that we don't fall victim or let our children fall victim to not getting the support they need, because these gifted students who have learning disabilities and need additional support are here. Additionally, there's characteristics of these students. They might have strong artistic and musical abilities. They might concentrate for a long time. They are stimulated and affected by surroundings. These students, because they're so concentrated, have the ability to hyper-focus on something, and that could really stimulate them in a negative manner. And they might need additional support. Also, because of their complex brain and their brains that don't work in the same way, they might have extreme positive or negative feelings, and then either the ability to process them really well, but they might be also like hang on to them. And because they're hyper aware of these really extreme emotions, they do need help further coping. They have a really strong affective memory also. So an affective memory means that it affects their emotions. So it's often that because they have such strong memories that they really stick and fixate on a memory, which then affects their emotion. And these typically can be pretty triggering for students. They might have a fear of failure. A fear of failure is very common because they're so used to succeeding, and perfection is also another big characteristic of giftedness, that now when they do struggle with something, it is an automatic fear of failure rather than just a mistake. Like we've already touched on, they may have learning disabilities and they should not go unseen or unnoticed. And then they also have the ability to self-regulate because they can typically, get really focused and concentrate, that they get very stuck on what they do and what they want to do. And it's having a hard time self-regulating to differentiate between wrong and right because their brains just don't work in the typical way that those of traditional students would. Overall, it's more than achievement. Our gifted students have so many more characteristics and needs that are encompassed within giftedness. It's not just achievement. Yes, they correlate, and that's our original factors for most of the time how we assess them, but it's not the only thing. Gifted students don't just achieve. They need support and they need guidance. So how do we know if our students are gifted? How do we assess to find out if our students are gifted? Well, there's two sorts of tests. These are achievement tests, but then also ability tests. Achievement tests are those that are standardized. In Florida, we have the FCAT, the NWEA, the FAST. These are all things that they are standardized, and then they can also give us a really good idea of how a student stands when it comes to school knowledge. But on the other side, there's an ability test. Ability tests are going to be closer to your IQ tests. IQ tests will show how the brain works a little deeper than achievement tests do. These are coupled together so that we do not just stick to one, and we can get a better idea of the student as a whole rather than just in a certain manner. So who do we test? Well, if you look at the graphic at the left-hand corner, while this is not ideal and there is some differences, it's relatively even across the board, especially within some categories. However, that shows that gifted students are everywhere within every category, whether it's a racial background, economic background, etc. So we should be testing anybody who who has the qualities of a gifted student. So reasons for students to be evaluated are if they're showing a high ability at reasoning at a rapid rate of learning compared to their peers. So sometimes there's this standout student who gets things the first time you say it in a lesson, or doesn't even need it. They're already ahead. And then also the achievement tests they have the high scores on state and district assessments. These would be students to test. And we shouldn't let our maybe biases or prejudices about certain groups affect our steps moving forward on whether to test them or not for being gifted and talented. And hopefully within next years, this data table ends up becoming a little more level, because there's no evidence that shows that one group is more capable than another group. So when do we test? There is no reason to test a student who is under 6 years old. At 6 years old, these tests are not accurate. They don't really understand them. This is especially true for our ability tests. Also, the IQ is rapidly increasing until the age of 6. At 6, that's when it plateaus. In Florida, where I am from, this is about second grade. Second grade is when we can finally test, and it's most common to test for gifted and talented, and often it's administered to the entire second grade. Or it's done late in first grade so that they can start getting their gifted and talented accommodations and extensions within second grade. So one of the first steps that we get for testing or the ability to test is a teacher observation. Below there is a example of a teacher observation form, and this shows a variety of things, and it's pretty much the teacher's way to document the students' character and traits within the class. So are they showing motivation? Do they have spatial abilities? Are they artistic? Do they have strong interests? Do they use inquiry? Are they asking questions? Things such as that. And then if this document that the teacher provides shows potential data that might alert someone for this student to be gifted and talented, then we can go on to secondary testing for giftedness. This is when we'll do our ability tests and some achievement tests that further our understanding of their knowledge. And honestly, the ability test can be quite fun. So for example, this would be a question that would be an ability test that would test for artistic giftedness, so our spatial abilities. And if you're looking at this and trying to solve it, the answer is actually C. If you look up, the green is behind the blue circles. There shouldn't be a star. Those are only on the top level. And it should lay underneath. And then we'll move on. The pinata participant notices she is facing west before blindfolded. She spun 180 degrees to the left and then 720 degrees to the right. In what direction is she now facing? While you're trying to solve this, I'll explain that this is directional. It's another form of spatial, but more mathematical. This is something that can assess for math, but then also students' artistic abilities or spatial abilities. If you've got it, the answer should be east, because what happens is they go from west and they just flip now to east, but 720 degrees is 2 complete circles. So the pinata participant will still end up east even after the 2 additional turns. And then finally, if you rearrange the letters of A, H, R, E, T, you would have the name of a And while you're thinking about this, I'll give you some time, but this is linguistic. Linguistic is their ability to read, manipulate words, manipulate sounds, and this is a big category of our gifted students. So the answer to this is planet. If you unscramble all those words, it will spell Earth. And honestly, a lot of people like doing the ability test because it really is fun, but it can also be frustrating for those who might not get it quite so fast or not at all. And that's totally common, but that's why we do primary testing before we do the ability testing or the secondary testing for gifted and talented. Finally, classroom implications. So once we go through the test or the observations and then the testing and we find out that our student is gifted, what do we do? Well, there's many steps that can be taken. And honestly, they're geared towards the student, their need, their type of giftedness, their personality, their drive, because at the same, or like I've been saying, they're all different. But Gifted in Classroom, I put up 6 steps pretty much. And these are the 6 steps that really are pretty broad and should be adapted to your students, but can offer an environment for them that allows them to extend their knowledge. So first, creating tiered assignments, making them multi-stepped. This allows students who are more advanced or faster workers to still do it, like the baseline work that the rest of the class is doing, but then they have an additional opportunity. Allow them to work at their own pace. If they're staying behind and waiting on their peers, they're going to get bored. This is not enriching their knowledge. Offer open-ended and self-directed assignments. Allow them to create. Allow them to explore. Allow them to use inquiry skills. These are the things that they're good at and further their abilities. Compact the curriculum. Many students do not need all of this information. They don't need all of the practice. So if you can, just, maybe do 1 or 2 practice assignments. And if they show the mastery, let them move on. Let them go ahead. Deliver project-based learning. This is my favorite because project-based learning is so student-centered that if you give a project, your gifted student can adapt it to their own ability, interests, and questions, and then it really reflects their knowledge and their abilities, and they're going to want to do it. Keeping students motivated, especially gifted students, is so important to their success in the classroom. Finally, pair gifted students up. Oftentimes, we think because a gifted student has it, let's pair them with a lower student so that they can help, and that's one less student I have to help and I can go help others. Yes, this is great, and sometimes this is really beneficial because it allows the gifted student to have a leadership role, which is really what many of them like. However, you don't want this to seem like a chore for your gifted student. We want to enrich them, not hold them back. So if you pair them up with another gifted student, they can bounce these great ideas back and forth and move quicker together as someone who can stay at their own pace. And these, again, are not all inclusive. They should be adapted to your individual student. And these are just some basic ideas of how we implement procedures and techniques into the classroom for gifted students. So finally, here are my references and resources. I included 2 resources, one if you're a teacher and then one if you're a parent. The teachers is actually a book about a guide for designing a gifted and advanced learning curriculum. So this offers great techniques and great strategies for your classroom if you have gifted students. But then also if you don't have gifted students, just a way to really further and expand students' knowledge through project-based learning. And then for parents, I have included a link that allows you to further your knowledge on gifted students. This is to help you understand maybe if you're questioning if you have a gifted student, or what's the process like? What are their characteristics? How can I help my gifted student? And then also in my references, there are great websites that are pretty reader friendly that can give you more information. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you got something out of this about gifted students, either in your life or in your classroom. And I hope that you take what you've learned and apply it to your student to help make their learning the best that it can be. And then have a good day. Thank you.